Thank you, Chairman Grassley. I'd like to begin by thanking you for holding this hearing on the important issue of intellectual property and how it is a driver of innovation that helps make all of our lives healthier and safer and more productive. This is a great way to honor World Intellectual Property Day. And I also want to thank Chairman Grassley for serving as the lead co-chair of the Congressional Trademark Caucus, which works to highlight the real and growing problem of counterfeiting goods and their impact on the health and safety of Americans. Now that we've officially relaunched the caucus for this Congress, I look forward to having more events together to draw attention to the real problems caused by counterfeiting. We're here to celebrate the role that intellectual property plays in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship in our country, a topic that's quite important to me. I've seen firsthand, growing up in Delaware, the value of intellectual property for individuals and businesses. I grew up in a neighborhood where most of the heads of household were DuPont engineers and many were patent holders, and that was sort of the mark of who was most respected in my community. I know that may be a little unusual in American neighborhoods, but I thought it was typical. And I went on from there to work for an innovative materials science company that relied on the full spectrum of IP protections, from trade secrets to copyrights to trademarks to patents, to protect the value of its inventions and its innovation. I look forward to hearing from this terrific panel of witnesses about how IP has helped our country achieve its goals and how you are contributing to a strong and robust IP system. And I thank you for your time and testimony today. I'll take a step back first and look at how IP affects our country. You heard from the chairman a number of compelling statistics. I'll mention that the Department of Commerce estimates IP-intensive industries contributed to about $6.6 trillion in value added to our GDP, and that we have a trade surplus in IP of about $85 billion due to the licensing of IP rights. It increases the likelihood of a startup company getting venture capital by more than 50% if they have a patent. And over 5 years, it increases startup employment growth by 1/3, and it increases sales growth by 50%. Having a patent that you can defend is absolutely essential to startup businesses in America. At the beginning of this Congress, we also, though, have to be mindful of some worrying signs that the U.S. is losing its competitive edge that it's long enjoyed by having a very strong IP system. The most recent Global Intellectual Property Index, released by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, ranked the United States as 10th in the world in the system strength for our patent system. In every previous year, we were ranked first. Census data released late last year found that back in 2014, the creation of new startups was at or near a 40-year low, and the share of venture capital around the world dedicated to the U.S. Fell to 50%, down from 80% 2 decades before. Just in the last few years, two of our main global competitors, China and India, have doubled their shares of the global VC market. And these statistics in total paint a worrisome picture of the state of our legal framework in support of innovation, that intersection between patents and venture capital that is so critical to launching and growing new businesses. There's other concerns I've heard repeatedly from industry and from the IP community, that a number of recent changes have weakened our patent system. Supreme Court decisions and federal rules changes have made it harder to enforce patents and weakened available remedies. Cases have called into question whether patents should issue at all in medical diagnostics and computer software, some of the most competitive areas of our economy, and there's real uncertainty created by post-grant administrative proceedings at USPTO, which can undermine confidence, particularly in technology-intensive startups. So these and other legal developments trouble me because I think a strong IP system, as the chairman also said, is one of our country's greatest inheritances. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution specifically sets aside a clause about the importance of patent rights and of strengthening intellectual property. And our founding fathers signaled their recognition of the value of incentivizing inventions and innovation by this clause and the original Patent Act of 1790. So they laid the groundwork for a strong IP system, in part because many of them were themselves inventors. We need to take care that we don't lose that inheritance. These challenges need the attention of our greatest innovative minds, the challenges that we face globally and here at home. And for that to turn from invention into innovation, we need a strong IP system. That said, I'm heartened by the knowledge fostering innovation and entrepreneurship remains a strong bipartisan issue. We can work together in a way that restores our unquestioned leadership in world IP. Chairman Grassley's work on the Congressional Trademark Caucus is but one of many examples of his bipartisanship on this. And on this committee, another is the leadership of Senator Hatch, with whom we worked to co-sponsor the Defend Trade Secrets Act signed into law last year. As we look to maintain America's competitive edge, it's important we have hearings like this one, celebrations of World IP Day, to remind us that protecting America's innovations and inventions is one of the most important things we can be doing. It will allow us to reclaim our role as the gold standard in intellectual property globally, and it will serve to make our lives healthier, safer, and more productive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much look forward to this hearing.
Mr. President, I rise today to address President Trump's proposed budget for fiscal year 2018. My predecessor in this seat, my friend, the former Vice President Joe Biden, once said to me years ago, "Show me your budget and I'll show you your values." And one of my concerns about the proposal that we've received, the initial sort of slimmed down overview proposal that we've received, it suggests values that I think are quite out of line with what my home state of Delaware would look for me to be doing in this body, and what I think addresses the real needs and priorities of the American people. President Trump released last month an overview of his budget, what's called a skinny budget, and we haven't yet received a full and detailed budget proposal. But even though what we've received is just an overview, it indicates that the cuts President Trump is proposing will significantly weaken vital domestic programs, often with the goal of completely eliminating existing and valued initiatives. This chart gives a rough summary that I know may be hard to read of all the different federal agencies that would take double-digit hits in order to be able to pay for a significant $54 billion increase to defense spending, targeting only non-defense programs that millions of Americans and Delawareans rely on, ignores commitments made over the last couple of budget cycles and years, as Republicans and Democrats have worked together to ensure placing equal priority on defense and non-defense spending. We've already made, under sequestration, under the Budget Control Act, significant cuts to important domestic programs. And after the difficult budgets of the last few years, in my view, we've already made too many cuts to some of the programs that help build our nation. To be clear, I'm as passionate as anyone in this body about supporting our armed forces, particularly when they're in harm's way, and particularly as we continue to conduct operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. But Democrats won't stand for cutting domestic programs simply to pay for a $54 billion military expansion that hasn't been explained or justified through a thorough review of what are the appropriate investments in defense that will respond to the challenges and threats we face in this world. To pay for that $54 billion increase in defense by cutting investments in education, housing, job training, and more here at home strikes me as the wrong set of priorities and the wrong direction. If anything like these proposed Trump budget cuts are enacted, I know my home state of Delaware would that help my constituents each and every day. Trump's budget proposal would cut research and health programs. It would cut job-creating infrastructure programs. It would cut grants for higher education. It would cut housing and so much more. I'd like to take a few minutes to focus on a few of many proposed budget cuts, just to give a sense of the impact it might have on our livelihood, on our security, and our prosperity here at home. Let me start with some cuts that would directly affect our national security, our safety. In my view, the deep cuts made in the proposed Trump budget would simply make us less safe. For example, the United States Coast Guard, which has a station in Delaware, would be cut by more than $1.3 billion. The Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, just as high a cut. Ironically, even though these are the very agencies that protect our ports and other points of entry, Trump proposes cutting their funding so that a southern border wall can be built for an estimate well above $25 billion. This simply makes no sense. If you listen to the words of Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Paul Zukunft, he warned that simply focusing all those resources on building a wall along the border with Mexico would just make our ports and waterways even more appealing to smugglers and those who seek to bring illicit drugs or to bring human people, traffic people into the United States through unlawful entry. That's not all. The Trump budget would make us less safe by depleting federal protection from natural disasters, starting with a proposed $600 million cut to FEMA, state and local grants. The budget also proposes restructuring fees for the National Flood Insurance Program, which would lead to raising rates for homeowners who get flood insurance. My home state of Delaware is the lowest mean elevation state in America, literally the lowest lying state and ground zero for sea level rise. These cuts would have a significant impact on homeowners up and down my state, those at our seashore and those in my home community, Wilmington, who face steadily rising flood insurance premiums. It's not just our safety, though, that would be impacted by the president's budget. It also threatens job growth and economic security. As a president who ran a campaign on a middle-class jobs agenda, I'm struck that his proposed budget would endanger Americans across the country financially by also undermining support for development in both rural areas and urban areas. Take the Department of Agriculture, which provides critical support through the Rural Development Program. In Delaware, at least, Rural Development, or RDA, has played a critical role in supporting housing and supporting businesses and supporting communities in the rural parts of Delmarva, Delaware, and Maryland. The Trump budget would also eliminate the development in distressed rural areas. That's a program that has supported things like Deltec's automotive technician training and architectural services for the Seaford Historical Society, among many other things. Something I'm much more familiar with and more passionate about is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Across the state of Delaware, the MEP, as it's known, has helped small and medium manufacturing companies to be better at taking advantage of cutting-edge technology, at better understanding how to manage their inventory, how to invest more wisely in new capital equipment, and how to grow and compete around the world. Since 2000, Delaware's Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program has used federal support to help Delaware manufacturers increase sales by more than $120 million, helping create more than 1,600 good-paying jobs and finding over $100 million in cost savings in Delaware's small and medium manufacturers. These are great impacts for a fairly small program. Why that program specifically targeted at helping small and medium manufacturing companies would be a priority for elimination is just beyond me. Cuts to other areas that impact research and energy in our economy also strike me as unwise and ill-considered. But it's not just our economy and national security. Trump's budget would also threaten our infrastructure, our transportation, and our housing. As a Delawarean and someone who rides Amtrak almost every day between Wilmington and Washington, just about every day that we're in session, I know how important our passenger rail system is for the Northeast as well as for connecting the rest of our country. Amtrak's long-distance routes are critically important to the nation's economy and to sustaining passenger rail as a nationwide federal service. Yet as our competitors around the world are investing billions of dollars in high-speed rail and in efficient rail networks that connect their whole countries, President Trump's proposal would eliminate all federal funding for Amtrak's long-distance routes. Another effective federal program that has made a difference in my home state in infrastructure is the so-called Tiger program, which invests in a whole range of infrastructure options, highway, transit, rail, and port, by leveraging private capital and supporting competitive, innovative solutions to infrastructure challenges. The Tiger program has supported projects like a new regional rail transportation center at the University of Delaware, taking advantage of the former Chrysler rail yard and the significant new growth we're seeing at the University of Delaware's Star campus. This is an investment that'll have several multiples, that'll leverage private sector benefits by promoting economic development, accessible housing, and multimodal transportation choices in the area. Many of my colleagues have similar experiences in their states about the impact of the Tiger Grant program. In the last year, it had a demand nearly 20 times the available funding. Yet the Trump budget would again eliminate all federal funding for this vital transportation infrastructure program that creates jobs and helps to leverage private sector investment. There are so many other programs on the chopping block, it's hard to even begin to touch on them. Community development block grants, which I relied upon in my previous job as county executive to provide support for low-income and disabled individuals to have access to high-quality housing. The funds that support things like Meals on Wheels that allow our low-income seniors to age in place rather than having to be moved to institutions. And many other programs through the Federal Department of Housing that has a positive impact in communities up and down my state, from Newark and Wilmington to Dover and Seaford. If you take the U.S. Department of Agriculture's rural water and wastewater loan and grant programs, these too would be eliminated entirely. These programs are critical to ensuring rural communities can access funds to support safe drinking water and sewer systems. Many communities in southern Delaware rely on rural water funds to ensure safe drinking water supplies for the families that live there. As I've suggested, the list of potential cuts to programs goes on and on. Let me move to some impacts on the environment briefly. The Chesapeake Bay is one of the world's largest estuary systems, and Delaware is a state that borders on the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Economists insist that there are nearly $1 trillion worth of economic value to the Chesapeake Bay watershed, yet the Trump budget cuts nearly half of the funding for the EPA to allow states to get grants that will help improve air quality, to clean up contaminated hazardous waste sites and remove lead from drinking water. Delaware alone would lose $3 million in these helpful initiatives. There are millions of Americans that rely on many more programs listed here: AmeriCorps, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Africa Development Foundation, and many more, all eliminated in this budget in order to prioritize a focus on our military and defense. But what the president, I think, doesn't understand is that we cannot maintain our status as a global leader with just defense and military alone. We need to ensure that a complementary strength exists in our development and diplomacy programs, which are less than 1/10 of our spending on national defense. I recently had the opportunity to see the impact that USAID and our programs to assist the hungry and needy around the world can make in stabilizing fragile states and preventing them from becoming failed states. We spend less than 1% of the federal budget on these sorts of programs, and they provide a critical connection to parts of the world where a positive understanding of America and our values would be a good thing. The International Affairs budget, which includes needed funding for USAID, State Department, and other related programs, would be cut by 1/3 under the Trump budget, a 29% cut for the State Department alone. And if history is any indicator, the last 70 years show these investments in diplomacy and development are critical. Foreign assistance is not a charity. It serves a humanitarian purpose, but also makes us stronger by promoting American values around the world, by building coalitions that isolate our adversaries, and by helping make millions or tens of millions less susceptible to terrorism and to extremism around the world. This is a false choice between significantly increasing our defense spending and the need to sustain our investments in diplomacy and development. I hope my colleagues and constituents will take time to think about the many different federal programs that I've briefly discussed in these remarks about the proposed budget, and all the different ways that these federal programs have invested in our quality of life, in our national security, and our economic prosperity. Many of them are scheduled for elimination under this budget. As I've heard both Republicans and Democrats say in press interviews and on this floor, though, no president's budget is adopted without change. It is my hope that this budget will be set aside and that the folks who represent our states here will begin anew the process of building an appropriations path forward that actually protects our country, protects our livelihood, and invests significantly in sustaining and saving the very best of these programs that have benefited my home state and my constituents for so very long. Thank you, and with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
A lot of talk about a wall, and heard a song by Pink Floyd just the other day. All in all, just another brick in the wall. And there's someone who want to build a wall, a president, on their southern border with Mexico. It's about 2,000 miles between Pacific Ocean and the Gulf Coast. About 2,000 miles. I've been down there any number of times as the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and now still as a senior Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, whose ranking member is Claire McCaskill of Missouri. But I've been not on every square inch and on every mile of the border with Mexico. But I can tell you this, there's some places on the border of Mexico where a wall makes some sense. And there are, frankly, a lot of places where it doesn't, including where you've got hundreds of miles of river, where it just doesn't make any sense. Also, I've heard from other folks, I don't know, there's a Yuma sector down there where the Border Patrol told me where they had an area where they had some wall, and they found, I think the wall is maybe 15 feet high, Mr. President, and they kept finding like 18, 19-foot ladders on the other side of the wall, where people would come up with a ladder to the wall, go over the wall, and head out. So you could go over a wall. You can even go over a high wall with a ladder that's high enough. And then a lot of that's been done. You can go under a wall and tunnel up. A lot of people try to get it into the or out of Mexico into the U.S. by tunneling under a wall. As it turns out, walls in some places make sense. Fences in some places make sense. Boats in some places, like on a river that happens to be our border, the Rio Grande, our border with Mexico. Boats make sense. Sometimes fast boats, really fast boats, make sense. Sometimes it makes sense to build a ramp so you can get boats in the water in the different places. Sometimes it makes sense to build a road on our side of the border to give us mobility. Sometimes it makes sense to put surveillance equipment in drones. Sometimes it makes sense to put surveillance equipment in helicopters. Sometimes it makes sense to put surveillance equipment in fixed-wing aircraft. But you don't send them out just with binoculars to try to find people. There's something called VADR, V-A-D-R, it's an acronym, and it's surveillance, highly sophisticated surveillance equipment that will actually go on our drones, go on our helicopters, and go on our fixed-wing aircraft. What's so special about this? You can see at night. It'll allow us to see dozens of miles into Mexico at night, through fog, through rain. And we have those systems, and what do we need to, rather than just send out aircraft or drones or whatever without that kind of surveillance equipment, let's put the surveillance equipment on it. That makes a lot more sense than building a wall, a 2,000-mile wall. Other things that make sense are surveillance towers. We have them go 100 feet up in the air, 200, 300 feet. Some of them are mobile, some of them are stationary. We have motion detectors. Some places that makes a lot of sense. There's no shortage of ideas that make sense. What I like to do is, when trying to figure out what to do, I ask people, like the Border Patrol, what do you think makes sense? And what they pretty much say is an all-of-the-above approach. We have an all-of-the-above approach in energy, and if we're smart about securing our border in Mexico, and I think we've gotten smarter as we've gone along. We certainly have a lot more people down there than we had before. We had like 20,000 people, our men and women of the Border Patrol. They work hard, do a good job. But it's an all-the-above approach. So I wanted to get that off my chest. The idea that does it make sense to spend $25 billion to build a wall that we may only need in less than 100 miles? Probably not. Absolutely not. One other thing that makes sense is the reason why a lot of the people that are coming across our border with Mexico, they're not-Mexicans. They used to be. There are more Mexicans going back into Mexico from the U.S. than are coming into the U.S. from Mexico. The place where a lot of the illegal immigration is coming from is three countries: Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. And here's why they come: because they live lives of desperation. They live lives without economic hope, economic opportunity, murder and mayhem. Some of the highest murder rates in the world. I think El Salvador, I don't know if we have the numbers here, but here's the three countries here: Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. And there you have a number of different routes that they take up here, mostly coming into the U.S. right here. They don't so much go over to El Paso, or certainly don't head over here on land to get in on the western side of our border. But some of them try to come by air, but mostly it's it used to be by train, mostly now by land. And they're dangerous missions. But the reason why they come is because there's not much hope there. The reason why there's not much hope there, frankly, it's in part us. There used to be a comic strip, Pogo. Presiding officer may remember Pogo. And one of the lines from Pogo was, "I've found the enemy and it is me." Or, "We are the enemy." And the chairman of our Homeland Security Committee said many times that the root cause of what's going on down there is our addiction to drugs in this country. And the drugs are trafficked through here to come to the U.S., sold, and the money for the drugs goes back to here along with guns. And when we deport bad guys, criminals, felons, and so forth, we take them out of the U.S. and we put them right back here. So it's a toxic mix of guns, weapons, and bad guys. And they make the life down here miserable for people. As it turns out, Colombia, 20 years ago, was a miserable place to live too. And one time, about 20 years ago, a bunch of gunmen in Colombia rounded up the Supreme Court justices of the Colombian Supreme Court, took them into a room, shot them to death. And there was a time when the FARC, the rebel groups, the leftist groups, and the drug gangs were trying to take down the government of Colombia. And it looked like they could. And some very brave people in Colombia stood up and said, "Not on my watch. We're not going to let this happen on my watch." came up with Plan Colombia in order to make sure this didn't happen. President Clinton, a guy named Joe Biden, who was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, led an effort to, not for us to fully fund Plan Colombia. Basically said, this is on you. You can do it like at Home Depot. You can do it, we can help. They did the heavy lifting. They did most of the raising the revenues. And we helped, we played our role. We've continued to play our role for 20 years. And Colombia is a different place today. The same thing can happen to these three countries down here. We've said to them, again, Joe Biden playing a significant role as vice president. I hope I was helpful, Jay Johnson, our former Secretary of Homeland Security, and others as well. And these folks in these three countries came up with something they call the Alliance for Prosperity. It's really like Plan Colombia, very much like Plan Colombia. Find out what works, do more of that. Plan Colombia's work. So they're trying to approach like this down here. And the idea is to restore the rule of law, to focus on infrastructure, to focus on making their government work and being effective. To really tamp down on the corruption that they have there, the extortion that goes on to the small businesses. And the idea is to create a safer, better place. Most people, they don't want to leave here. I've talked to plenty of them. They don't want to leave. They want to stay there. Some of them might like to come up here and work, but then go home. This is their country. And they love their country, just like we love ours.